Rob Saka would love to earn your vote.
Can I count on your vote?
You absolutely can.
We'll be saying hello to some new faces on the Seattle City Council after a contentious fall election with 7 out of 9 seats up for grabs.
I'm the current council member who represents District 2.
Only 3 incumbents decided to run again, and early returns are favoring their challengers.
People were looking to make some changes.
Plus, are voters supporting a city council member changing jobs and a new, more expensive housing levy?
I think the lesson is it could have been larger.
Our studio panel weighs in on the early election count and what those results say about the top issues for Seattle voters.
The dollars exist to end this crisis. What we lack is political will.
Deciphering the details of the 2023 election, next on City Inside Out. And welcome to City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. This week, we are breaking down the results of the November elections here in Seattle, and have I got a great panel of experts to help out, including Erica C. Barnett, founder of Publicola. Erica, good to see you.
Great to be here.
Also, we have with us Stuart Elway, who's been doing nonpartisan opinion polls across the Northwest since 1975, started at the age of 3. Stuart, great to have you here, too. And joining us as well, finally, Gregg Colburn, an associate professor of real estate at the University of Washington. He has researched housing and homelessness extensively, key issues in this election. Gregg, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's jump right into it. And Erica and I want to talk numbers to start with you. A very busy election, 7 seats on the Seattle City Council on the ballot in our 7 districts, only 3 incumbents running. We saw a lot of moderate candidates take some early leads in the election night results here. Starting in District 1, West Seattle up into Pioneer Square. Again, very early here, but Rob Saka, 58.7%, Marin Costa at 40.8%. This was the largest gap of any district on election night. What do those numbers tell you?
Well, one thing it tells me is that spending really matters. There was a tremendous amount of outside spending by independent expenditure groups in this race in particular. It was close to $500,000 backing Rob Saka, so I think that really helped. And, you know, I think we'll see that as a theme in a lot of the other races as well. I
was going to say, too, District 2, Southeast Seattle, Tanya Wu, 54.2%. Incumbent Tammy Morales, 45.3%. It would appear that maybe some of the later progressive votes might help Morales in this race. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is one race, I would say, that's still up in the air. Tammy Morales has shown in the past that she can close a gap of about 9%. You know, every single race she closes 8 to 9%. So she's, you know, almost 9 points behind. She could close this. I think this is the only race that is truly sort of up in the air at this point, but we'll see. Okay, fair enough. District 3, Capitol Hill Central District out to Madison Park. Joy Hollingsworth, 58.3%. Alex Hudson, 41.4%. Any surprises here? Not terribly surprising. This is actually what I predicted, and my predictions are usually wrong, so I guess I was surprised by that. But yeah, I mean, Joy Hollingsworth benefited from the early endorsement of Mayor Bruce Harrell, and this was an unusually undivisive race. I thought that was the one really unusual thing about it.
They were very collegial with each other, for sure. Another candidate supported by the mayor, Maritza Rivera, in District 4, 55.3% to Ron Davis's 44.2% on election night. Some thoughts on this one?
This was another you know, heavy spending race. I also think Ron Davis didn't do himself any favors by flip-flopping or appearing to flip-flop on a number of issues. And I think Rivera really benefited from not talking a lot and just kind of letting her opponents spend. And of course, as in all these races, I should mention, portraying him as a fan of defund the police and being soft on crime.
That was a constant echo as well. District 5, North Seattle, Kathy Moore, 70.1%. Christiana Obey-Sumner, 29.5%. This one's been called by the Seattle Times. I'll keep moving along here. District 6, Ballard and Fremont, Pete Hanning, 50.8%. Incumbent Dan Strauss, 48.7%. Is this a closer one? How do you look at this one?
It's closer than I would have expected. Dan Strauss is probably presumably going to pull it off. But, you know, Pete Hanning did not have outside money alone among the other, all of the races.
It's the only race like that, yeah.
So, and he did not succeed in defund Dan was his slogan. And I think that was not successful, partly because of a lot of Strauss's votes that don't support that narrative.
Final one, D7, downtown Seattle up to Queen Anne. Bob Kettle, 55.8%. Incumbent Andrew Lewis, 43.8%. That would be a big gap to make up.
It's happened before. Shama Sawant closed a 12-point gap in 2019,
right.
So it's not inconceivable, but it's a big gap. And I was at the party last night. Andrew Lewis was pretty glum. Bob Kettle's party, by contrast, was jubilant.
All right. Well, fair enough. Thank you for breaking down those numbers. Stuart, some more numbers. Let's talk about the Crosscut Elway poll in early September. It showed 44% of voters wanted significant change on the Seattle City Council. Another 41% said change it, but not that much. Looking at the early returns, how'd this play out?
Well, I think people got what they wanted in our poll. We did the poll early September and haven't polled since, just to sort of set the table. And people were looking to make some changes. And in some ways, the biggest change for a lot of people had already taken place when Shama Sawant is not going to be on the council anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of took a lot. I thought it took a lot of the energy out of the race, the overall race.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting taking it a step further in the people who wanted significant change. 57% of people in the poll said they wanted a more centrist candidate. In the moderate change camp, 67% said vote for a progressive out there.
Right.
Looking at those numbers, what did you...
Well, it was, they said they were going to vote for the moderate, but then when we asked them who they were voting for, more people were voting for the progressive. That's a fine line in Seattle. We have light blue and dark blue candidates.
Yeah, that's true.
And so we're going to get change almost no matter what, because the three incumbents are going away. And so I think people want to change. They were going to get it. But as we're seeing now, the light blue candidates are leading everywhere. But as Erica points out, in 2 years ago, all of the progressive candidates made up 12 points, or 12 to 14 points between Monday and Friday. So there's
lot to look at here still.
Lot to keep going, yeah.
All right, fair enough. Gregg, I want to talk to you about this. You've done a lot of research on homelessness and housing, top issue for candidates in this race. It has been for a long time. Your new book is Homelessness as a Housing Problem. I'm still reading. Chapter 1 is fabulous, by the way. One key message you lay in that first chapter that I think is very important. You're really trying to cut through some of the political noise surrounding homelessness and focus on some larger solutions. And I know your research compares cities nationwide, so I want your perspective. How much does this progressive versus centrist or moderate debate that we're having here in Seattle really impact the homelessness crisis?
Well, I think there are a couple different ways. I think the vote on the levy is a clear indication.
Housing levy, yeah.
The housing levy, clear indication that people recognize we have a housing crisis. And that manifests itself as unaffordable housing for school teachers, and it also manifests itself in a homelessness crisis that we observe on our streets. I actually find the city council races pretty interesting because I actually was teaching an affordable housing class right before I got here. Yeah. And we talked about in class, what is this signal in terms of how our community might respond to the crisis of unsheltered homelessness? And I would suspect, and although I could be wrong, that we might see slightly more harsh responses in terms of moving people, removing encampments, having maybe a more forceful response to the crisis. Yeah. And so what I think we see voters saying is we understand that we have a deficit of housing, we will fund that, we also have a short-term crisis, and we want to see action on that. And so that's what I take away from these results.
Thank you. That long-term and short-term has been a battle with the homelessness sphere for so long. And maybe, Eric, and I can have you weigh in on what Gregg is saying here. Considering the new faces that we're going to see on the city council next year, what direction do you see our city going when it comes to homelessness?
Well, I think Gregg is right about the harshness of the response. I would say, it's hard to know how much more the city can do in terms of removing encampments. I mean, you walk around downtown and Harold's policy, the mayor's policy of removing encampments is very visible. So I think that there will be an effort to crack down on encampments more. But I think, this election was so much about crime that it almost turned away from homelessness. And it's not as if homelessness, diminished as an actual problem between August and now.
Right.
It's just that, the campaign's focused on this, relentless drumbeat of crime. And so that's what it ended up being about. So we'll see. I mean, I don't see a lot of new spending on homelessness, to Gregg's point, to actually solve problems, especially with the deficit that's looming.
Thank you. And I'm going to come back to that public safety issue in a little bit. But, Stuart, I just wanted to make sure I talked about your work with Crosscut on statewide polls over the last few years. Homelessness is tops on voters' minds, and it has been for a long time. Your thoughts about that, and maybe your take on the early results, and maybe what these more moderate approaches to homelessness might say to people.
Well, it has been a top issue statewide, not just Seattle, but certainly Seattle. It's been top Seattle. We know what the issues are in Seattle. They've been the same issues for the last several election cycles, and I think what people are saying is they're not seeing progress. But in our poll, so the top issues were homelessness, crime, affordable housing, and then policing. So two issues for 4 parts. Yeah. And people want all of them addressed. We had large majorities in our poll support hiring more police, giving them more training, hiring more substance abuse programs, more diversion, more density, more housing, and then the housing levy passed. So people want all of them addressed, or at least one of them.
Yeah.
Pick a problem, do something.
Right.
It's kind of how people think.
Got it. Thank you. Erica, real quick to you, I wanted to take a look at a race that's affecting the city council. At-large council member Teresa Mosqueda has a slim lead, about 50 to 49% on election night, in a race against Burien Mayor Safira Aragon for King County Council, position 8. Let's say the late votes swing progressive, as they often do, and Mosqueda goes on to win that position. How does that impact the city council? How does that impact the county council?
Well, I mean, I think the county council will be getting a real asset in Teresa Mosqueda, very involved, active, intelligent, person who does her research and does
budget chair for the council,
budget chair for the council. So I think that she'll be an ally to people like Claudia Balducci and Girmay Zahalai.
Yeah.
I think on the city council, I mean, this is going to be a really interesting open question. If they end up appointing a successor to Teresa Mosqueda next year, it's going to be the new council. Sarah Nelson might be council president at that point. I've heard she wants that position. So they will presumably appoint a moderate. So we could see, yet another moderate to centrist city council member joining that majority.
Yeah, almost a super majority at that point, if you would look at it that way. Stuart, I just wanted to touch on one point here. This whole idea of the votes swinging progressive late. I always see that in elections. What is that? What's the phenomenon that's going on there?
Well, I think the progressive vote tend to be more younger folks, more, I don't want to say, less established in the community. Okay. I mean, in terms of, they haven't lived here for 20 years.
There you go. Okay.
And so the more established folks, they want what they want. They vote early. The younger folks seem to vote later. They want to study more. They don't get around to it. My waiter yesterday at lunch said, "Oh no, it's on the table." I said, "Well, you got 2 more hours to go vote." There's just a little bit less attention, I think, to city issues. And so they vote later, and they get counted later.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure I talked about that. Gregg, I wanted to touch back on that housing levy issue with you here. So the Seattle Times has called this one, too, a 66 to 34% margin on election night. This one is looking like it's going to win. There was no organized opposition to this measure. It seems to have transcended this moderate and progressive debate somewhat. I guess I wanted to look at this a little more closely. Is this the kind of policy local leaders should be promoting, preserving affordable rental homes? What do you make of this vote?
Well, I actually served on the technical advisory committee for the levy, just in the interest of full disclosure.
Please.
I do think it's something that we should be pursuing. And in fact, looking at Twitter this morning, a colleague of mine at the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. highlighted the Seattle levy as a wise community-focused effort to create more housing in a city that desperately needs it. And it used a funding mechanism that is progressive, and so it lined up well in terms of ideology and the output. Yeah. I think the challenge and issues that I raised in our advisory committee meetings was one of scale. Yeah. And I think, do we desperately need it? Yes. And is $970 million sufficient to end the crisis of the housing and homelessness crisis? No, it's not.
Yeah. Certainly not by itself.
Certainly not by itself. Yeah. And so it's an important input into a total solution, but it is not a silver bullet, would be my opinion.
Thank you very much for that. Stuart, I want to jump back to you on this one. We touched on this earlier. 58% of the people you polled in September said they would either definitely or probably support the levy. And as we've heard, 66% closer to approving it on election night from the returns there. What do you make of these numbers? They're relatively close to that 70% of voters who approved the housing levy in 2016. This has some staying power. It's been around since 1986.
Yeah, I mean, I think both, as I said earlier, the issues have stayed at the top of the list, and every solution that gets proposed gets approved because people want a solution. So you name a solution, I'll support it.
Yeah.
But I think there was some restlessness about, gee, we don't seem to be making much progress.
Right.
On the other hand, we mentioned earlier, the potential for a sort of a harsher approach. In our poll, there was a majority who picked. The choice was moving the tents out of the parks or developing permanent housing, and the majority wanted developing permanent housing. There was not a majority for let's just sweep everybody away out of sight.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a real compassion as well as a recognition that we got a problem, but there's a compassionate response overall.
Thank you for breaking down those numbers. Just real quick on the housing levy with you, Erica. So the 2023 housing levy, $970 million, more than triple the $290 million price tag it had back in 2016. I remember back in 2016, the levy was more than double what it was in 2009. So it's a cost that's gone up significantly. And I've just seen this, and I was talking about this with Stuart before the show. Seattle voters just about always support raising property taxes for these different levies and initiatives here. Do you see any message here with the levy vote, or what message do you see after it's been increased so substantially?
Well, interestingly, there were voices before the levy actually went onto the ballot saying that it could afford to be much larger, and there was a lot of pushback, as I understand it, that voters are not going to just support increasing this infinitely. And I think the lesson is it could have been larger. I mean, the problem with just comparing year to year is that things are a lot more expensive now. Construction in particular is a lot more expensive. Labor is a lot more expensive. So that $970 million levy tripling doesn't actually triple the amount of housing. In fact, it barely increases it. And so we're sort of staying, almost flat, increasing the amount that it'll build a little bit for 3 times as much money. But given the numbers, I think it could have gone higher and actually made a more significant difference.
Yeah. Gregg, was that going on behind the scenes? People were pushing for more?
Absolutely. The initial proposal was for flat units, and the scale of the crisis now is greater than it was in 2017 or 2016. And so I think there was a clear recognition that a stable number of units, because of the inflationary pressures that Erica mentioned, was not sufficient. I was a voice on there saying, did we think about 3x that number?
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not a politician, and I don't have to report to constituents, but I think it's an open question of what scale do we need to really address this crisis and change the trajectory of the housing and homelessness crisis in our city.
Stuart,
well, and politically, since we know that Seattle's supportive of these levies, making one larger one is easier to sell than, well, didn't we just do that 2 years ago, and now you're coming back again, and now you're coming back. So breaking it up may not be the best political strategy. Because the problem is still here, and you're asking for more money now.
I think it is clear, though, that it's one tool that the city's trying to use. And Gregg, maybe I can jump back to you, because there's a housing issue in the background of this election. The social housing initiative Seattle voters approved in February. This is a new system. It creates a public development authority to build affordable housing with units for people of mixed incomes. It's tenant-run, more common in Europe than we see it here in the U.S. So the PDA now has its startup money with a boost from the city and the state. But I was just trying to look big picture. Do we need the housing levy and this new system to make an impact? Are there more tools needed? What do you think?
Well, I think the social housing initiative is, I think, a recognition. I mean, to me, the vote for that was a recognition that we need to think about other types of housing. Yeah. And that solely relying on the private market for housing doesn't work. It's worked fine for me. It doesn't necessarily work well for everyone. That's what I take from that. We still need to figure out how to fund that authority, and so that's an open question. And so to me, there are a variety of different entities that we could use to accelerate the production of housing. That could come from the Seattle Housing Authority. It could come from this new private development authority. We can use funds from the housing levy. I travel around the country talking about this. I always say the answer is D, all the above. When we talk about the deficit of housing, we need a lot of people to be building housing from both public and private sources. We need lots of funding mechanisms, and we need to do it quickly.
Yeah, I saw you making a note to yourself there, Erica. You've talked about this.
The note that I made was spending problem in quotes, because I think that the city council candidates that have been running have been saying, the city doesn't have a budget problem, it has a spending problem. And that makes me worry about things like the social housing program, because, it is going to require spending. And I think that there is not a lot of appetite for additional spending on the city council right now. That is alarming if you believe, as I do as well, that you need all kinds of housing. Social housing is also middle income housing,
right.
Not just the very low income housing that the housing levy funds. So it's a different kind of housing.
That's right.
I think all of the above is going to be a hard sell with a council. If they genuinely believe that the city is somehow spending too much money on housing and other things that the city funds.
Yeah, it's for people well above the area median income, that's for sure. So, Stuart, I wanted to jump back to you, talk about public safety. You touched on this earlier, this idea of hiring more police officers, definitely a hot topic on the campaign trail. Hundreds of officers have left the SPD in the past couple of years. It's been a challenge to recruit and retain new hires. So in 2021, your poll showed 54% of people supported hiring more officers. This year, that number's up to 64%. How do you think this played out?
Well, we talked earlier about how the crime has stayed at the top, and the focus this year seemed to shift a little from homelessness to the crime aspect of the social problems we're having.
Yeah.
And so I think people want to have that. But as I said, that they want to have more police. They support that. But they also supported by 72%.
Right.
A new Department of Emergency Response.
Non-police alternatives.
Right, yeah. So again, it's not just let's arm up and sweep people away. It's not that.
There's more to it.
There's much more to it.
Erica, some thoughts about this, how police hiring, public safety impacted the 2023 election. I don't think those two are necessarily equivalent to each other, but I know a lot of people might have seen it that way. Some thoughts about maybe what Stuart's saying and your take on how public safety and police hiring played a role in these elections.
Well, I think that there was an oversimplification and conflation of all of those issues, as well as homelessness to an extent. But I think that it was the number one issue. Every single district had mailers that said the other candidate, except for I think maybe District 3, had mailers saying the other candidate supports defunding the police. What I think will be very interesting is now this group has a mandate. And they're going to get in there and they're going to, presumably have an agenda similar to the Harrell administration. And I think what they will find is that it is actually quite difficult to hire police just by saying it, because there is a nationwide problem with getting people to want to be police. And it is not just because the Seattle City Council was mean to police once. It's a massive, overall issue across the nation. And I think that they're going to find that it's not as easy as it might seem on a campaign mailer. Yeah,
they're offering $30,000 bonuses, too, to some of these hires. So thank you for that. Stuart, back to you as we start wrapping up here. I'm looking towards the future of Seattle, if I may, with you. Your September poll showed 63% support for a new tax on Seattle's largest businesses. 60% said they'd support a new tax on Seattle's wealthiest residents. What does this tell you about where voters want to guide city leaders, maybe when it comes to the economy going into the future here?
Well, we talked earlier that Seattle never seems to be faced with a tax that they don't like. So, but it's easy to say I'm for a tax in a poll. It's another thing to say to actually pay the tax. And this one was someone else is going to pay this tax. So I thought it was a little bit easy to say that.
I see. That's an interesting piece on that. Gregg, I know this whole concept of the income gap between high earners, low earners is a key issue here for leaders in Seattle, certainly as a driver when it comes to housing, too. What's your research telling you about the kinds of policies local leaders need to be thinking about to keep Seattle prosperous and hopefully make opportunities for people of many different income levels?
Well, I think one thing that we have, and it's not just Seattle, it's many of our coastal cities, have not done a very good job is pairing housing growth with population growth. And so what we've done is we have imported lots of well-compensated employees who are now residents of our communities, which is wonderful. It's prosperity, and no one's going to argue against that. The problem is we have not created sufficient housing capacity for people who are incumbent residents who have now been priced out. And so we've got massive displacement, we've got homelessness, and it's a consequence of our prosperity. And so what I find frustrating for the wealthiest cities in the United States is that's where homelessness is most prevalent. The dollars exist to end this crisis. What we lack is political will. And so we absolutely need to prioritize investments in housing to ensure that people who've called Seattle home for 3 decades can can continue to live here. And to date, we haven't done that, and we're living with the consequences.
Thank you for that, Gregg. Erica, I want to wrap up with you on this thought. We touched on this earlier, but new leaders are coming into Seattle. They're inheriting a budget gap, more than $200 million next year. There are going to be some tough choices ahead. What are your thoughts about a new council and how they're going to deal with them?
I think one thing they're going to do is start raiding the Jumpstart Fund, which Teresa Mosqueda, as budget chair, has protected, and as the founder of that, that initiative, which is a payroll tax on big businesses.
Yep.
And I think they're going to see that as a cash cow. It brings in a lot of money for affordable housing and other purposes, and so I think it is just inevitable that money sitting there, they're going to say, well, we got to use some of that to close the gap. As far as progressive new taxes, I don't know. I mean, with this mandate and this number of new centrist candidates coming in, not sure that we're going to see a big push, but perhaps a capital gains tax, could happen this year. I mean, we're still in the middle of budget season right now. Right. So the existing council, the current council, could come back with a tax increase before the new council comes in. Yeah, we will see what happens there. Thank you all for this feedback here, and we will see you next time on City Inside Out.